Welcome to the Rejected Religion podcast. I'm Stephanie Shea. My guest this month is Gregg Harmston. Gregg is an independent researcher, writer, and music producer from the UK who focuses on esotericism and occultism alongside media and literature theory, cyberculture, fictioning, and non-standard philosophy. He graduated with an MA in spirituality and religion from the University of Amsterdam in 2025 and is currently working on expanding his thesis research into a PhD project. In this episode, Gregg peels back the layers of the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU, a group that stands as one of the most unique and enigmatic forms of modern occultism. Using a matryoshka doll methodology, we look briefly at the core members of the group and then explore the CCRU as a collective myth and an independent entity. We trace their origins from the intellectual split between Sadie Plant's cyberfeminism and Nick Land's dark inhumanism, fueled by the rhythmic, nonlinear influences of the 1990s jungle dance scene. We discuss time sorcery, the Numogram, and the mechanics of Hyperstition, the process by which fictions make themselves real through cybernetic feedback loops to reshape our present reality. To explain this concept a bit further, the core of Gregg's thesis focuses on Hyperstition as the idea of fictions that make themselves real by functioning as time circuits or self-fulfilling prophecies. Gregg illustrates how the CCRU's use of theory fiction was not merely a literary style, but a deliberate writing magic designed to bypass rational thought and manifest inhuman entities or future outcomes into the present. Ultimately, this thesis positions the CCRU as a unique bridge between 20th century esoteric practices like chaos magic and the digital age occultism of the 21st century, suggesting that the group's influence persists today as a collective entity or egregore that continues to shape contemporary culture and philosophy. For my Patreon and YouTube members, we dive even deeper into the controversial legacy of Nick Land in Part 2, re-evaluating him not just as a philosopher, but as an experimental occultist who used extreme methods to achieve ego dissolution. We also tackle the complex evolution of accelerationism, tracing the pipeline from CCRU-era theories to the intellectual foundations of the alt-right and the modern phenomenon of meme magic. However, we also explore the alternative, hopeful sides of these tools, examining left accelerationism and Mark Fisher's acid communism to see how these theories can be used to reclaim lost futures and foster collective hope. Welcome to the podcast, Gregg.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
I am so happy to be able to talk to you about your thesis. I'm actually thrilled, to be very clear, because this is a topic that we'll be discussing that is one that is, I find, very special, and it's one that I've talked about a few times before. But in this regard, I'm feeling a bit honored as well because I was lucky enough to get a little mention in the footnotes and in the bibliography of your thesis. And that was rather kind of an odd feeling to see my name there and to be referenced. But yeah, kind of a good feeling at the same time. So yeah, I'm very honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, yeah, it's great to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say. So. Yeah,
Great.
And like you say, it's actually because of listening to Rejected Religion that I ended up going to Amsterdam and studying esotericism and writing the thesis that we're now talking about on here. So it's a nice loop there.
I'm just tickled pink by that when you told me that this was the inspiration for you to do this.
Yeah,
it was the summer school, right, that you did with Christians?
Yeah, I heard the episode with Rowan Cabrales and then heard about their master's thesis involving CCRU, and then I sort of looked up the department at the university and I was like, oh, you can study esotericism at this level, which was like I didn't know about at all. And so then I did the summer school at UVA, and then the master's after that. So yeah, it's been a big thing in my life since then, I guess, really. So yeah, very cool.
I'm so happy to hear all that. That's just wonderful. And also that makes me feel very, I don't know, it just makes me feel very touched. That's something that I chose to do, when I did the interview with Rowan, that was like right at the beginning of Rejected Religion, when I was just starting out. And to know that made an impact on you and that spurred you to take a step in a different direction that you might not have gone in before. And that makes me feel really good. I'm really happy for you.
Cool. Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah. And thank you again for doing the interview. And
this is great. I mean, this is what it's all about, right? We're trying to get connections here and to help people find out about all of this stuff and learn about it.
Yeah,
so that's what this is all about. Great. Yeah. So you have written a really interesting thesis called Layers of the CCRU, Cybernetic Myth and Hyperstitional Writing Magic. And in this, you are talking about the CCRU and hyperstition in a different way than I have, talked about before. So I'm very happy to start to, kind of fill in all the little empty spaces that were kind of left from my prior conversations. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty, as they say, though, could you talk a little bit about what inspired you to choose this as a topic? I mean, what's a little bit about your background and how this all came about for you?
So I originally heard about the CCRU from looking at stuff about accelerationism online. And obviously, Nick Land is a key figure in accelerationism. He's a member of the CCRU, an important member, as we'll get into. So I kind of went back to look at the CCRU stuff, and I just found it just kind of I kind of didn't understand it at all at first, which I found very intriguing. I was like, what is all this stuff? Right. What does it mean? What is it doing?
Yes.
And then I sort of gradually made my way through texts and work and tried to sort of like understand it and piece it together. And so, I just find it very fascinating. I think the people involved are interesting. I think they're particularly interesting sort of thinkers and academics, sort of unusual in the academic space, really. And I think their methodologies that they use, the way they produced philosophy and also sort of enacted it at the same time, and the very disparate sources they draw from. So they draw from philosophy, but also cybernetics and also like weird fiction and sci-fi and conspiracy theories and all these kind of things that you wouldn't think to put together, especially within like academic philosophy. So it's all just very wild and interesting to me. I think it's kind of one of the most sort of interesting things that's happened in philosophy and occultism and kind of, I guess, English literature in the sense of the field, the writing techniques, but then also sort of literature from England and English writing and stuff. I think it's just incredibly sort of unique and interesting. And so, I've been sort of fascinated with it since I found out about it, really. And I've been gradually going deeper into understanding how it all works, where it all comes from, because I don't really have a background in philosophy. So there's a lot of Kant and Bataille and Deleuze and Guattari in there. And so I had to kind of go back and read all those and get an idea of what they're about and how they link forward and all that kind of stuff. So, it's just there's all these different layers to it, which I find very interesting. It's a very cool rabbit hole.
It is indeed, yes. And you've mentioned now here already that it has layers. And your approach in your thesis is to talk about the CCRU and discuss it as if it is a layered thing. And you use the example of the Russian nestled dolls. That's called the matryoshka. Did I say that correctly?
I think so, yeah.
Matryoshka. That's the dolls that are, one doll is nestled inside the next doll and the next doll. So you have, in the center, you have this tiny little doll. And it's a wooden, and it's usually painted to look like a little grandmother or something like that. So for people listening, if they're wondering, what is she talking about? It's those, those kind of old-fashioned dolls.
Russian nesting dolls.
Yes, exactly. So you mentioned that we can't really understand the CCRU unless we look at it as this layered thing, because
Yeah.
there's all these different things happening, as you just mentioned. They're thinking about a lot of different things. They're using a lot of different approaches, a lot of different methods. So you lay this all out in your thesis. I guess we should just jump right in.
Sure, yeah.
The first layer, layer A, is the CCRU as research group.
Yeah.
This is something that I haven't really gotten into a lot of detail about. So I think this might be a good opportunity to talk about Sadie Plant, talk about Nick Land. I mean, of course, they've been mentioned, but we haven't really talked about how this all came about. How did this group happen? How did it even be? How was it created? What led to this split between Sadie Plant and Nick Land? And why did the group have to move? And then it also kind of took on this different flavor after it moved away from the university.
Yeah.
So if you could talk about that kind of stuff, that might give us a good starting point.
The reason I sort of chose the layers really is that's kind of how if I was going to explain to someone what is CCRU, I'd say, well, it's this and it's this and it's this and it's this.
Right.
But then the layers are kind of interconnected and overlapping as well. So it's never quite that simple. But that was kind of the most logical way I could lay it out, as if I was kind of explaining it to someone. So the first layer I started with is just the people themselves, the actual real life academics at Warwick University. And the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit starts with Sadie Plant. So she joins Warwick, and she's doing this kind of new cyberfeminist theorizing involving sort of women's relation to technology, and technology is emancipatory for women in a feminist kind of mode. And so she gets research assistants from the university around her, and she's doing her thing. So she's how the CCRU starts, basically. And then later, Nick Land joins as a philosophy professor. I should say this is in the philosophy department at Warwick University. Around 1995, it kind of starts. I think around that time is when Sadie Plant comes in. And so Nick Land comes in. He's a philosophy professor. He's into Kant, Bataille, Nietzsche, kind of Deleuze and Guattari, so some post-structuralism. He's into this strand of philosophy called libidinal materialism, which we can maybe go into a little bit more. But he's a heavy philosophy guy, and he writes a book on Bataille called The Thirst for Annihilation, which is it's quite a mad book, really, in terms of academic books. It doesn't have the sort of scholarly distance you'd usually expect. It's not exactly so much Nick Land writing about Bataille. He's doing Bataille in the process of writing the book. So he's really interfacing with Bataille, doing his ideas, doing his philosophy in this process of kind of talking about Bataille. So it's this weird sort of communion between him and Bataille. It's quite wild. So Land is someone who is doing philosophy. He's trying things out. He's experimenting. He's embodying these ideas and actually sort of living them in a way that you don't generally get with philosophy professors and academics and philosophers and stuff. But he's an unusual case in quite a lot of ways. But no, he's a particularly sort of interesting academic in that regard. So the first period, they're based at Warwick University. They're sort of on campus. They have an office in the philosophy department. They're sort of there officially. And after a while, Nick Land gets a bit wild. There's some drugs involved. His philosophy is getting kind of wilder and wilder. And because, like I say, he's kind of embodying things and trying things out, he perhaps doesn't have that sort of professional distance that you might expect from a lecturer at a university. And after a while, Warwick are look, we're very open-minded about practice and trying new things, but you can't really be doing occult rituals, raves and drugs on campus. And so CCRU at this point sort of leaves, and some of them move to a house in Leamington Spa where Aleister Crowley used to live. We can maybe get into that later. But I bring that up because the second period, the kind of off-campus period, is more of the esoteric occult stuff that I'm kind of interested in researching. And so at this point, Sadie Plant, she just wants to do her kind of theory stuff. So she breaks with the group. It's not like they have a big falling out exactly. It's just she's not so interested in the occult side of things and the Lovecraft and doing rituals and all this kind of she's, more of just wants to write a theory. So she leaves and then becomes successful as a writer. She wrote this book, Zeros and Ones, that came out in the 90s, which is an incredibly influential and popular book. I can remember seeing it in Waterstones when I was like a kid growing up in the 90s as being like, this is like a cool book, of the time. So she sort of parts ways with Land at that point and then goes on to write about women and technology and that kind of thing. She writes for technology magazines, and she wrote this really interesting essay for Motorola, the mobile phone company, about like mobile phone communication. So she carries on writing stuff, but she's not involved with the kind of the spooky, esoteric, occult second period that the CCRU has. So that's the kind of split with those two there, really.
Okay. Yeah. So her interests weren't really aligned anymore with what the rest of the members of the group were interested in exploring.
Yeah, it sort of gradually changed over time, and she just, on her own way kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned just now, and you also talk about it in the thesis, so people can read about this too, that music played a big role in what the CCRU was doing. And you mentioned raves, but there was also a type of music that they called jungle music. That was kind of, I guess, the first wave of it, and then drum and bass came out of that.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a lot of like performance art and things like that were happening with the CCRU. So they were doing a lot of what you were talking about, occult rituals, but they would do their rituals in this kind of I guess like a theater space, a space where people are performing and they're performing like music space, So music played a big role in it. But I was wondering if, because you didn't mention this in the thesis, if other performance groups like Throbbing Gristle, that later became Topi, the Temple of Psychic Youth. Were they playing a role in any of this as far as influences? Because, of course, Topi also had a big musical presence within their group.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
They were doing a lot of performance art. I guess you could call it performance art, but they were all doing a lot of ritual as well. Genesis P. of course, had his own path that he was following with the group. So were there any like overlaps there? Were there any influences there that you could mention?
I don't know that there are any. I mean, it's a similar milieu. You've got like Chaos Magic, CCRU, Throbbing Gristle. It's kind of like the same zone almost, but I don't think there is no sort of direct reference to Throbbing Gristle or Genesis or the Temple of Psychic Youth or anything.
Okay.
In terms of like I feel like Mark Fisher maybe mentions them somewhere, but they're not sort of brought up in relation to the occult magic stuff so much, even though there are overlaps. And like you say, CCRU they're involved in music. So some of their members are like Kodor Ishun is sort of interested in music and sounds, like sound as a weapon. And like you say, jungle music. So this is a new thing that's coming in the UK, a new style of electronic sort of dance music, but it has this particular breakbeat rhythm to it, which CCRU are very interested in because of the way it sort of distorts time and moves backwards and forwards. They see this as being a sort of like a textual thing. And like Kodor Ishun talks about sort of scratching records as being a kind of thing distorting time and breakbeats. He talks about sort of breakbeat science and the ability of jungle to sort of affect a change to the human through physiology and rhythm and those kind of things.
Right, because there's some of those beats that they're making are also like looping backwards as well. So it kind of sounds like the time is going backwards.
So it
has this effect on the body anyway, that it makes it feel like it's going backwards. It doesn't have that forward feeling rhythm.
Yeah, it kind of skips back and forwards. Yeah. So CCR looks at this as being a sort of like a technology of a sort that can distort time, and this is why they're kind of so interested in jungle breakbeat particularly. So at the time that CCRU is operating, there's a lot of new like electronic music, virtual reality, the internet. A lot of these things are coming in at around this time, and so CCRU are kind of incorporating them and working with them and thinking like, how can we use this for our aims and our projects kind of thing. So that's, part of the reason they interpolate all these different things. But then they'd have conferences where they would be, reading philosophical papers over breakbeats and over jungle music and that sort of thing. And so they brought music and performance in, and some of the conferences they held, they did rituals with music and video art and all these different things.
Right.
There's a group called Orphan Drift, who are like an art collective they worked with quite a lot. So they would come in and do sort of performance art, dance pieces, I suppose, which were linked to the CCRU sort of thematically and in terms of their ideas and stuff. So they're presenting theory in all these multimedia sort of different ways, I guess, which is, interesting too. Yeah.
If we're talking about theory, then, is there a kind of an overarching theory that the CCRU is working with?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, they have a lot of different sort of theories and ideas. Broadly speaking, they're trying to look ahead and make new philosophical theory which takes into account things like the internet, virtual reality, cyberspace, all these things that are coming in. So they're trying to think like, when these things are just normal and around us everywhere, what kind of philosophy and what kind of theory will we need to kind of deal with that? But because they're kind of writing theory, but they're also like doing theory, the theory itself is part of this idea they have called cybernetic culture, hence the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, which is, broadly speaking, kind of creating cultural objects and modes which self-sustain and self-replicate and kind of swarm throughout culture and society. So this is why they're interesting in sort of positive cybernetic feedback. So feedback loops that like feedback into themselves and get, more and more active. They want to sort of apply this to like cultural modes so that they can go out into the culture and expand and sort of permeate through culture sort of on their own, like as these due to cybernetics. And this has a valence of kind of anti-normativity, it's to fight back against dominant cultures in a sense. It has a kind of revolutionary kind of thing to it.
Right.
Also, yeah.
So if I remember correctly, the idea that they were like trying to push back against or maybe challenge was this idea of capitalism and, kind of the status quo of the world at the time. How things were going, the dominant systems and things like that they were trying to find different ways of navigating that or maybe challenging it, pushing against it. And I find it interesting that they're using music, technology within music as a way to challenge that. The philosophy was also, these different ideas coming in. What I find interesting is that you were talking about cybernetics and you're talking about these feedback loops. And these cybernetics was, it probably still is, used as a way to kind of, if I'm thinking about magic, I mean, when people are performing magic, they're trying to change something. They're trying to impose a change on something. And I'm kind of seeing, I don't know if you're following me here, but I'm kind of seeing maybe a link in that cybernetics might be using different feedback loops, different methods or means to try to influence behavior. And magical ritual is also, in a way, trying to influence something, at least the outcome of something that you're trying to, affect a change on something. Is there a link, a specific link there is this an obvious link that they're making between the cybernetics and the magical rituals, the occult rituals, that they're trying to use these together in this way to kind of boost the effectiveness of what it is that they're trying to do?
I mean, I would say what CCR was doing with some of their theory and writing the way it operates is magic. And they actually, Mark Fisher said that all words are magic words. And so, CCR believed that reality isn't opposed to fiction. Reality is composed of fiction. So by writing, you can make changes to signs in reality through that, which is effectively doing magic. I mean, that's, matches many definitions of what magic is, including one that CCRU uses themselves. So they're consciously doing magic. And I would say they use cybernetics as a kind of occult technology as part of their rituals and as part of their writing process. And we can get into that a bit later, maybe with Hyperstition and that kind of thing. But they're using cybernetics as a kind of technology to boost the effectiveness of their magic operations. And that includes writing. So cybernetics is the study of kind of systems and energy moving around circuits and that sort of thing. It's generally like physics, engineering kind of area. But because CCRU is interested in these, they call them cyber positives. So these feedback loops that self-amplify and also have a potential to kind of break off and just go into chaos, which, like I said, with the sort of cultural modes they're interested in, there is this kind of punk or cyberpunk pushing back against the system kind of dynamic to it. So that's part of the way they're doing that is through these kind of methods.
Correct. Okay.
But yeah, I would say using cybernetics as a kind of occult technology and instantiating it into their writing in order to do that, which is it's quite a weird thing to do, to combine cybernetics and literature. It's just like, it doesn't sound like it would make sense, but then it
on the surface, it doesn't sound like it would fit together, but it does. And yeah, forgive me for asking what might seem kind of like stupid questions, but I'm still
not at all.
I'm still learning about this myself. This is all still, I'm exploring all of this. I mean, I've been learning about this for many years now, but it's always a new terrain, new frontier when I read something new, and then I'm like, okay, this is a different way of talking about it. And I think you did a really good job in your thesis of, laying it all out, explaining it very clearly. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm understanding how they're using this. Okay, so when Plant and Land then split and the CCRU moved off campus and they started to do different things, was it at this time that Land started to get these new ideas about the quote-unquote dark inhumanism? Because there was this idea that this, whatever force this was, it didn't really care about humans, or it was indifferent to humans.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Lovecraftian old ones, that they don't care about human beings. So this, whatever this is, this energy that you're working with, you're trying to, or the magic that you're doing, it doesn't really, it's not, there's no morals, there's no ethics to it. It's kind of this, with quote unquote dark in so many words. Is this happening already, or is this stuff happening later down the road?
Yeah, I mean, Land is always interested in the sort of the unhuman. And this comes from his sort of philosophical background and what I mentioned before, libidinal materialism.
Oh, yeah, let's get back to that.
Yeah, so this is comes from Freud's idea of the death drive, of being like this unconscious drive, this unconscious desire. And then so from that, there's this philosophical strand called libidinal materialism, which is concerned with not libido in the sexual sense, but in the sense of desire as such. So it's like an economics of desire and what these flows of desire are doing. And it involves these kind of unconscious, subconscious processes of the human. So the death drive is this desire for death that we sort of have. And it's it's kind of under the surface. We're not really conscious of it, but it's kind of driving us. And so libidinal materialists are interested in these sort of machinic processes that are going on under the surface of philosophy and us and our desires and those kind of things. And so this kind of is always of interest to Land, these non-human processes that are kind of under the surface or outside some kind of human barrier where we're not able to access them. So he's interested in Kant's idea of the noumena, this absolute outside, and trying to reach that and going sort of beyond the human, and also these non-human processes that are involved in the human. And so this is, Deleuze and Guattari get their idea of capitalism from this as being this machinic process that kind of is overcoding our flows of desire and interrupting them and kind of manipulating us in that way, in a sense. So that's a very sort of basic way. And I'm sure if there's any philosophy people listening, they're going to be shouting at the screen that I've got Deleuze and Guattari wrong. But
look, I'm not a philosophy major either, so it's,
okay, right. Yeah, cool, we're okay.
You're not going to get any pushback from me in that regard. So
essentially, Land's always interested in these non-human elements and these processes which are outside the human in some sense that we can't access. And this idea of reaching this kind of absolute outside beyond what he calls the human security system, which is we're sort of kept in the human mode And therefore we're unable to access these outer layers. And he sort of correlates that with the realm where Lovecraft's Old Ones originate from as well, this sort of absolute outside where everything's just swirling chaos and we can't deal with it, it's beyond our comprehension. So we have this like cozy human understanding of everything where everything's nice and simple and everything's solid and material and we know what's going on. But actually there's this outside realm of kind of swirling, non-human kind of madness. And that's Land's trying to reach that through philosophy and through drugs and through these other things that he's doing. But this leads him sort of like away from humanism and anthropocentrism and towards these like non-human processes. And that's kind of the path that he carries on, and then eventually is just sort of unconcerned with the human and with anthropocentrism. And he's just, it's not like he's anti-human, like he thinks humans are bad. He's just not interested. He's interested in these other sort of things.
Is it kind of like a crash and burn idea of like, let's just put it full throttle and just go and just take it to the absolute limit and not stay in your safe little zone? And that's why he kept pushing himself? Because you wrote that he basically burned himself out. He was depressed. It was probably because of the drugs. He might have had a mental break as well. I mean, you don't know. I'm just suggesting here. I don't know for certain. I wasn't there, but I mean, I can imagine that's.
I think it's probable. Yeah, if you're kind of dealing with these kind of ideas, you're not sleeping because you're taking a lot of amphetamines, and you're just writing all the time and just constantly sort of dealing with all these really heavy abstract concepts. I could see how that might have that effect.
Pushed it not to the limit, but over the limit and past the limit, where he gets into this space.
But this is...
but that's what he wanted. He wanted that.
This comes from Land's interest in Bataille, and Bataille talks about sort of limit experiences, about pushing yourself to the limit in order to transcend in a kind of way. So this is what Land's trying to do.
He's getting out of his ego, getting out of his head, and getting out of all of that stuff.
He's trying to like escape the human altogether and get to this sort of absolute outside.
Right.
Which,
okay.
And as you say, he then sort of like following the CCRU period, he kind of disappears for a while and has this kind of breakdown, and that's, like we're saying, conceivably because of that.
Okay, so when he came back, then he had developed these other ideas that pushed the limits, as it were. Did the other members of the group, did they have problems with this?
Well, because Land's doing this and acting this way, this is kind of why Warwick University falls out with him. He's asked to leave. But then following the CCRU period, he reappears in Shanghai in China. And in the kind of intermediary time, he's still been writing things, but he's gradually getting more into sort of right-wing political theory. He starts reading this guy called Curtis Yarvin, who is a thinker in an area of political philosophy called neo-reaction. And Land sort of merges his ideas with Curtis Yarvin. So Curtis Yarvin wants this kind of like neo-feudal monarchy kind of system where basically corporations sort of rule these like kingdoms almost. It's an idea he calls patchwork. So the idea is that there's this, it's a political arrangement where you have this patchwork of different states or countries effectively, and each one is kind of run by the CEO of a corporation, and therefore a corporation as a kind of monarch. And the idea is that if you don't like the rules that one monarch has, you move to a different state which has rules that you do like. But they're all effectively run by these like corporate monarchs. And Land kind of gets into this idea and takes on other things from neo-reaction, such as being sort of anti-egalitarian, anti-democracy. Curtis Yarvin has this area of theory, this idea called the cathedral, which is what he sees as the sort of socio-political, ideological apparatus that runs society. So this is the media, this is the universities and what they're teaching, this is like all the different sort of aspects, which he sees as being sort of left-wing and progressive. And to him, this is bad. So we need to have a new reaction against this, a neo-reaction against this. So this is kind of like what he's pushing against. And Land kind of joins in with this because the idea of sort of techno-corporate monarchies and letting capitalism just kind of do its thing and run everything kind of overlaps with his ideas around sort of acceleration and other things that he's formulating in the kind of post-CCRU period. So he kind of fuses those things together and takes a political turn.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's put a pin in that because I want to get into accelerationism in more detail later on. But at this point, I guess we're still only in layer A. So
okay. Yeah. I was going to say, actually, Fisher also splits with him at this point as well, because Fisher is... Mark Fisher is one of the other sort of key members of the CCRU. He's actually a student in the department, but he becomes a very influential socio-political kind of theorist after this.
Right.
And he's sort of inherently left-wing in his orientation, so he falls out with Land based on that, but also Land's formulation of Deleuze and Guattari in this later period, which is, Land says that sort of techno-capital is like this one-way thing. It's just going to overcode and grow things. And Fisher says, no, in Deleuze and Guattari, there's deterritorialization, which is that. But then there's also reterritorialization, which offers the possibility to push back against it. And therefore, Fisher says Land's idea is too dark and deterministic about what's going to happen with techno-capital. And so they kind of fall out at that point, even though they don't fall out as, as people, but they make an ideological split. As well. Yeah.
Okay. So first, Sadie Plant leaves because of, it was just kind of a conflict there of interest. She just wanted to do her own thing. So then CCRU left the university, did their own thing for a while. And then there was this split between Mark Fisher and Nick Land.
Yeah.
And that's when Nick Land went off and just disappeared for a while before he surfaced in Shanghai. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's before that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
all right. So that was kind of like then the end of the CCRU as the entity at that time. That was the end of it then. Okay.
Yeah, like when Land sort of leaves and disappears, there's no more CCRU stuff happening. Like there's the people, some of the members from CCRU, a lot of them go on and do a lot of other things, but there's no output called CCRU, which is, the group output. It kind of just ends at that point.
Okay, so because the group didn't really last that long then. It wasn't really decades long type of initiative that was happening here. So
yeah, it was around kind of 1995 to sort of 2002, 2003. Yeah. So quite a short period of time, but a lot of stuff happened in that period. Yeah.
Very intense. Okay. All right, so that's kind of layer A then in a nutshell. Then we're moving on to layer B, which is the CCRU as myth. And you introduce a term in your thesis called the technique of hypersyncretism. So before we even get to hyperstition, we're talking about hypersyncretism. So how did the CCRU construct a non-linear mythology using this?
Yeah, so in the CCRU writings, particularly the ones in this sort of second period, they form, like a mythos, a mythology. And this is formed from short stories, essays, sort of abstract poems, letters, all these different types of texts which relate in a non-linear way. So there's no sort of beginning, middle, and end of the narrative. It's like there is kind of a narrative, but everything kind of clusters and groups together rather than being like a beginning, middle, and end. So it's joined together from all these different sort of aspects. And some of them are real from the real world and some of them are fictional, and they kind of merge together within the mythology in this kind of way. So they created this mythology through, all these different writings. And this thing I term hypersyncretism. So you have syncretism where tradition borrows from another tradition or takes an idea and sort of adapts it.
Yeah.
And CCRU does this, but they do it on a lot of different layers at the same time. And they're not just interpolating like an idea. They take like a whole reality, like H.P. Lovecraft's fiction. All of it exists in the CCRU mythos as it does in real life. And it sort of becomes part of the mythos. So it interpolates things on a different scale. It interpolates whole realities, whole genres of writing, people, things, ideas, and it isn't just using them in one way. It's using them to represent sort of philosophy, narrative, ideas about cybernetics, occult ideas about magic, all these different things. So it uses them on multiple registers at the same time, which is this kind of layering thing I find so interesting with them. Is it, this mythology that they've kind of created, on one hand, you could look at it as being just like a narrative, like a story, like a sci-fi conspiracy narrative, which involves this time war. We can maybe talk about the time war a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But on another level, it's also a set of philosophical speculations which are demonstrated through the narrative and aspects of the mythology instead of just sort of writing them in an academic paper. Mm-hmm. So Land has these ideas about time and about all these different things, and instead of just like laying them out, he creates this, this whole story and this mythology which demonstrates them and kind of explains them at the same time. So it's operating on multiple registers at the same time. So that's kind of what I mean by that. It's like the complexity and layering that they use in creating this kind of mythology. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the time war, the Lemurian time war, and I did I did talk about this with Rowan, and also actually, now that I think on it, we were talking about this a little bit. Tommy and I were talking about this when he was talking about Burroughs and how
Burroughs is a big part of it.
Yeah, Burroughs is also a big name in this story. But I guess maybe because this mythology that was created is like the example of what hyperstition is, in essence. Because what they're doing is creating the hyperstition with this myth, because they're, like you said, they're using fiction, they're using real life events, they're using real people, they're using fictional characters, they're interweaving this all together into this grand narrative, as it were, for the CCRU. So by using maybe a portion of, we could talk a little bit about the Lemurian Time War, that we're giving then, we're kind of jumping ahead here into the magical writing genre, because as you said, this all kind of, it's not just one layer and then the next and then they're all kind of interconnected. So we're going to jump ahead then into layer D a little bit to talk about magical writing with the Lemurian Time War as the myth. So how is then the fiction making itself real through this narrative, through this grand narrative of the time war?
In the sense that the myth explains hyperstition and how it works.
Yeah.
So this idea of hyperstition is a fiction that makes itself real. This is a kind of, I would say, a kind of magic technology that the CCRU are using in their writing. It goes on to become other things in other contexts, but at the time that CCRU are using it in the sort of writings I'm analysing, it's, I would say, a kind of magical technology. So the mythology explains how hyperstition works by talking about William Burroughs and how William Burroughs' writing is magic and changes reality. It is operating in a sort of hyperstitional way. But because of all the layers going on, another layer of the mythology is that it is itself a hyperstition. And the magical system that the ancient Lemurians use in the myth that the Time War is kind of based on is hyperstition. So it's a demonstration of hyperstition while explaining it, while actually being a hyperstition itself, because the magic system and hyperstition are used by people in our reality, in our real world. They have sort of hyperstitioned themselves into reality and are affecting our reality. So the magic system in the CCRU mythology is actually practiced by modern occultists, and they work on it and use it like you would with, Crowley system or any other system. So the magic system is about hyperstition. It explains hyperstition. It involves hyperstition, but also it is hyperstition itself. So it's kind of like brain scrambling. But this is what I mean about the sort of the layers and the different registers that things are happening on. It's just
okay. So you also what I appreciated about your thesis is that because this can get kind of crazy making, because what are you talking about? It's a hyperstition, talking about a hyperstition, explaining a hyperstition. Well, what's the hyperstition? But you give some very practical examples of what a hyperstition could be. And you use, for example, the Y2K bug as an example of a hyperstition. Because in essence, what is happening is that the more that people talk about something, the possibility of something happening, it seems like, in my simple brain, it seems like that is making it more likely to happen.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so with the Y2K phenomenon, that everybody thought that the computers were going to die at the year 2000 because it was going to go back to zeros, and then, the computer is going to just, stop working because it won't know what to do, it won't restart. In the real world, that didn't happen, but there was this huge fear around it.
The phenomena happened.
Yes,
like
the
a
phenomena
thing happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's the hyperstition then. It's this, people were convinced that this was going to happen. And
in a sense, it's like the idea that it's going to happen becomes so real that people act as if it's going to happen. And then it has the same effect as if it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Even though sort of it doesn't. So it's like people feeding into the idea essentially. And this is sort of the cybernetics part of hyperstition, is things feeding into the hyperstition to kind of make it more real, and sort of bring it from a state of sort of potential, or like a virtual state, into actuality by making it more and more real until it sort of, I guess, kind of, you could look like it crosses a barrier and it affects something in our world. So the idea of Y2K affected it made everyone, hire computer technicians to check their computers, and all the businesses did that. And there was all this stuff that happened around it.
Yeah.
And it was the idea of Y2K that did that. And so in a sense, that was the Y2K phenomenon, was the fear and the thing. And everyone sort of collectively powered it up until it became real enough that everyone acted as if it was going to happen.
Right.
And sort of,
Right. And another example you gave is the stock market, the way the stock market can crash because everybody has, all these predictions ahead of time, and all of the people,
absolutely, yeah.
So I really appreciated that. Those are very simple ways of talking about how there is this kind of this idea dropped into the collective, and then it starts to snowball, and people start talking about it, and it's, people talk about it.
It takes on its own reality.
Yeah. And people are very persuasive about their arguments, and that, and it starts to get people kind of believing that, oh yeah, this could be real. Another kind of on a different little tangent, but Bob Clueless was talking about how Slender Man was a hyperstition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that actually did break through and bleed into real life. It did cross the boundary of fiction into real life with...
Yeah, in a very tragic way.
Yes, very, very much so. The little girls believing that Slender Man was real and that they had to try to attempt to harm their friend. And of course, this was all very tragic because these girls are of course suffering with mental illness, but all the same, this did happen, and it did break through. The fiction did break through and become a reality.
Yeah.
So these are real world examples of a hyperstition, and that kind of, I think that is helpful for people who might be listening to this podcast for the first time thinking, what in the hell is this all about? It kind of makes it a little more tangible.
For sure, it's pretty hard to explain. But, the core kind of idea is like that a fiction is affecting reality. It kind of contaminates or invades reality in a sense, and has an effect on us in kind of the real world, as you would think of it. Yeah.
Okay, so we moved through layer B, where you talked about the hypersyncretism, how you're, taking all these different elements and melding them and using them to create this mythology. We kind of got into the idea of hyperstition as the myth, the CCRU as the myth, and then hyperstition as an example of that myth. Then you go into layer C, where you're talking about the tradition of occultism, the invented tradition. And here, we kind of touched on Lovecraft a little bit already, because the influences on this tradition were, of course, these fictional authors such as Lovecraft, Burroughs. Mm-hmm. Also, maybe you could talk a little bit about Kenneth Grant here.
Sure.
That makes the CCRU collective, this idea, actually what I think what your argument here is that this is a unique and novel form of occultism is what's happening here. So if you could talk more about how this could be seen alongside traditions such as chaos magic.
Yeah, so within the CCRU mythology, part of the kind of Time War story is that there is this ancient race called the Lemurians who are like sorcerers. They're like a magical race. Their culture is based around magic and numerology. So within the writings of the CCRU, there are grimoires essentially on how to use this system of Lemurian, it's called Lemurian time sorcery. And the reason it's time sorcery is because it's using hyperstition and magic to affect the timelines and to make things happen. So this is the idea that, a fiction can invade reality and have an effect, and then it changes the timeline of what happens, and then, butterfly effect kind of thing. It can send time in these different directions. Yeah. So in the sort of narrative of the mythology, the Lemurians are kind of like using this as a magical weapon to make reality sort of go the way they want it to, essentially. So it's this sort of current of time sorcery. And it involves a diagram called the Numogram, which is sort of the central piece of occult technology in the CCRU system. And this is like a map of different numbered zones. So again, it's based on numerology, on decimal numbering, and Land sees as the kind of occult nature of numbering and counting. And it's kind of dealing with number and time and these kind of things. So there are different zones or areas on the Numogram. These correspond to different Lemurian demons. So part of the CCRU writing is like this index of these different demons. They each have like different numbers and like a pitch, like as in like sound attached to each of them, which are used in these kind of magical calculations with the Numogram. So a lot of the magical system is based around sort of mathematics, essentially, in a similar way to like you would find in Kabbalah and Gematria. And that's an influence, I would say, on it. Yeah. So this system that can actually be used, it can actually be, you can do the calculations and you can travel around the different areas of the sort of time map, and you can call on the Lemurian demons in these different zones in the way that you would with other systems of demonology like Grisha or whatever. It's sort of comparable in that way, but it is completely sort of unique. Like the demons are like, they're not demons in the sense of like Grisha, they're like mathematical entities or anomalies. They're like these mathematical presences because the whole system is sort of based around number and stuff. So it's like occult number stuff. So the actual operations of using it are you do these specific maths calculations with specific numbers with specific demons and the specific numbers from the different zones, and then you sort of put these together, and that's one of the ways you use the system. And another way is for sort of, you can do like a system of divination using playing cards and these numbers, which functions a bit like the tarot. So you can ask a question or, that kind of thing. So it is a practicable sort of system, but it is like an invented tradition in the sense that it claims to go back to ancient Lemuria. Well, CCRU's version of ancient Lemuria, it's a bit complicated. So CCRU builds on the existing idea of ancient Lemuria from Blavatsky and so on, and they sort of adapt it so that the Lemurians are these magic people and they have this system of magic and whatever, and they sort of weave all that together. Yeah, so it's invented in the sense that like it has this kind of false origin point, and it has these, documents which claim to be very old documents, but are actually, were written in the 90s by CCRU and Land. And then, the Numogram itself, Land and CCRU claim it was sort of given to them from the outside, presumably. And so there is this obscuring of its origin, like it was delivered to CCRU by an entity from the future, but then in the mythology, it comes from the past. So it sort of has this like, it comes from past and future at the same time. And because they're having this merging of fact and fiction, it makes it difficult to tell like what's real and what's not, and like where do things come from. And so that's part of the strategy they're using to kind of build this tradition, is that you can't tell what's real and what's not or where it comes from. It's just kind of there, it's the thing, and you have to sort of approach it that way, kind of almost. What
I find interesting about Hyperstition is that if you look back at other traditions, like from New Thought, you have, there are, of course, earlier ideas of I mean, of course, magic is even older than new thought, but these iterations of how you're thinking about something influences what actually is going to happen in the real world, so in the future. But what I find interesting about Hyperstition is that it's retroactive. It's retroactive, and it's also, what's the opposite of future active? It's it goes back and forth because there is no linear time. It's like the Mobius strip. It's all connected. It's all interconnected, that what was happening in the past is influencing the future and vice versa. So there really is no, we have to kind of get that idea of linear time out of our heads, because this system doesn't function that way. But
no, it's kind of retrocausal and atemporal. It's non-linear. And so a hyperstition is kind of gathering itself from different points in time towards the point where it exists. And like one way Nick Land explained this in a lecture once, which I thought was really helpful, is he said, if you imagine dropping you've got a video of a rock being dropped into water, and then the ripples go outwards from the thing. And then he said, imagine how hyperstition works is if you played it backwards, so that all the ripples came from different directions and then conjoined at the center. So the things that build a hyperstition, they could be coming from the future and the past and these different places. So there's not, as you say, it's not a linear thing. They're kind of gathering themselves from all these different points in time to sort of this kind of central point.
The thing that I have found to be the most helpful, and people that have listened to me before are going to laugh now because I always bring things back to Twin Peaks. But if you're familiar with Twin Peaks
is great.
I think that Twin Peaks is very, very skilled at, even I'm not saying that this is what they intended to do, but as an example of hyperstition, I think Twin Peaks is great at that, because you have the lodge area. You've got this in part 3, of course, Cooper goes to this other realm that's kind of outside of this lodge, and I don't really know what it's called, but he goes to all these different places, and all of these things are happening. There is no idea of, what's happened in the past, it stays in the past. No, everything that is happening, especially also with the backward speech. I think there's even a line in the show that, is this the future, is this the past, or there's always these playing on something that might have happened in the future is now going back in time and affecting something that's happened, to the characters in the past. So it's really playing with all of that, with those ideas of, there really is no sense of time in these other spaces. But the spaces are also influencing each other. There's a real effect that is happening on these other spaces as well. They're influencing each other. They're kind of interconnected in that way. So that would be another example of, I know that a lot of people think Twin Peaks is crazy and weird and they can't wrap their heads around it, but it is, in my opinion, it is a really good example of how time is moving in all directions at once. So it's, it's just kind of all the same.
Yeah, it's the non-linearity and the kind of different ways things can connect that are non-linear. And this is something the CCRU is sort of really interested in general, and it comes from Deleuze and Guattari and the idea of the rhizome, which is maybe explain it very briefly.
Please, that is helpful.
So the rhizome is it comes from botany originally, and it's like a root system where it can grow in different directions and join onto other plants and form new plants. And Deleuze and Guattari, who are these French post-structuralist philosophers, they take this idea out of botany and they apply it to philosophy in terms of it being this kind of networking structure, which you could, a piece of ginger kind of works like this, or the roots of a plant, it can grow in any direction. And therefore, if you have these rhizomatic things, this way of networking, anything can join to anything else, and you can have many varied combinations of the ways things are connected together. And CCRU are very into this idea, and they apply it in the structuring of a lot of stuff, which is why it's really difficult to lay it out in a linear way because everything connects to everything else. It's do you start with Lovecraft and then you end up at philosophy and what over here, or you can start with the philosophy part and then you get to the magic and then you get to Lovecraft over here and then Burroughs. So one of the sort of struggles I had with the thesis was kind of like laying it out in a linear way. It like nearly sent me mad a few times to try and like put something that's non-linear in a linear way. Exactly. Yeah. Where do you start? Where do you end? You could start at any point and they all connect up, and it's like, it's all this big crazy network of like interconnected ideas and theories and stuff. So so that is something that they're sort of very interested in, this structure, because it allows for, this multi-connectivity, and things can connect with other things and be in new combinations. So this allows for like novelty and kind of new modes of doing things. So that's kind of why they're interested in.
Also, I think with Burroughs, that with the idea of the cut-ups and using words as magic, and I think that fits very well into this idea of making fictions into real things over enough time that it's going to happen, that things are going to change, or there will be a dubiousness as to if it is a fiction or if it is real, quote unquote real. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that makes it so intriguing about how, if you start to really think about, and I know this is all, Hyperstition on the CCRU, this is all, philosophical discussions about abstract things, and
on one level,
on a level, but on another level, you can talk about this in like a day-to-day thing, and how people do convince themselves of things that might not be true, but then end up becoming true because of the fact that their mindset, the frame of mind, and that this is the way they operate, this is the way they move through.
They act as if they are true.
Yes. So I think that there are these other links to other things such as New Thought, or just, magic, and of course, magic is being used here, but for references, if you think about New Thought, New Thought, I guess in a nutshell would be, thinking is believing, that believing and thinking makes it into your real life situation. The power of positive thought, that you're going to, focus enough time and attention on something, and you're going to, it's basically magic, but they put it into a newfangled type of little jacket and
changing reality in a sense. Yeah.
So this is basically what we're talking, and I think this is kind of what we do, all of us do kind of on different levels every day. We're all doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, convincing ourselves of things. And
yes. And I mean, if we look at news, like you were mentioning before about media and politics and things, and we'll get into a little bit more about that later. But you see this playing out in so many different areas of life. So while this may have started out as a thought experiment and philosophical and abstract, it has infiltrated in the rhizome way. It has kind of permeated throughout our society now. And
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I guess this might be a good segue into layer E, when you talk about the CCRU as an entity in and of itself, an egregore.
Yeah, so the kind of final layer or sort of way of looking at CCRU, or what it is, I think, is as this kind. I discuss it as an egregore. So an egregore is something that's built through group input and endeavor and thought and will, and sort of therefore becomes this sort of entity in a sense. And in some of the CCRU writings, it's discussed that like CCRU, because I should have mentioned, in the CCRU writings themselves, none of the individual people ever mentioned. So Nick Land's never mentioned, Mark Fisher's never mentioned.
Right.
All the texts are credited just to CCRU.
CCRU,
as a collective thing. Yeah. So in the text it will say CCRU did this, CCRU met with this person, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of anonymized thing. And in one of the documents, it talks about CCRU as having retrochronically kind of hatched itself from Warwick University philosophy department in 1995, and it had been gathering itself from all these other points in time, and it sort of manifested there through Sadie Plant and Nick Land and Warwick University, and that sort of hatched it. But then it's described as like sort of outgrowing its home there and becoming like this wider, bigger thing that's like outside the bounds of academia and whatever. And it's like, and because of the way that the CCRU merges fact and fiction so much in their writing. There's this effect where CCRU is like the subject of the writing, but it's also doing the writing. So this entity is sort of writing about itself and writing itself into existence, which is Hyperstition effectively. Yeah. So there is this way of looking at CCRU as like a wider phenomena, that it is a hyperstition that is sort of like built itself into reality using Sadie Plant and Mark Fisher and these people. But then it is also this kind of entity which is like affecting time and affecting culture and doing these different things and kind of drawing from different sources to like make itself more sort of powerful and real. And it's kind of, you know, having this effect in our reality, which is a hyperstition. So the entire of the CCRU itself and everything contained in it can also be viewed as one giant hyperstition as well, which is,
And would you consider it an autonomous entity?
Yeah, in the sense that it's kind of like drawing on these different things to build itself, and it kind of leaves ideas and sort of like fictional myth characters and concepts like hyperstition just around in culture and society for people to sort of pick up and work on, or like, you know, ponder over, whatever. And every time someone does that, this entity CCRU is spreading further and further to more people, and it's becoming more real and more effective. And the more people doing hyperstition, the more powerful hyperstition is. The more people reading and learning about the Lemurian time war and all the events and characters in it, the more real they become in a sense, because they're sort of more in our consciousness and therefore can potentially affect things more. So it's sort of growing by itself in that sense. I wouldn't say it's like thinking or like, you know, doing things in that way, but it has this like snowball effect almost, where it's kind of like spreading out into these different areas and doing different things, which Yeah, I
mean, I think you did a great job of, in an hour or so, trying to explain your thesis. So well done for you on that part.
This concludes part 1, and my thanks again to Gregg for this fascinating discussion. For the rest of the conversation, where Gregg and I talk more about Nick Land as an experimental occultist, and we delve deeper into the concept of accelerationism and how this relates to occult practices, please consider joining my Patreon or YouTube memberships starting at just a few dollars or euros a month. For those who might not know, I'm active on YouTube again after a long hiatus, and am creating unique content there as well. Recently, I have been working on a video series called When Symbol Becomes Proof that addresses allegations of demon worship and ritual magic, among other things, by fashion designers and performance artists Rick Owens, Michelle Lemmy, and the drag artist Christine. I'm working on part 3 right now and hope to have that ready for upload in early June. Check this out if you're interested in detangling conspiracy theories and spiritual warfare narratives. And as I mentioned, I also have a Patreon if you're interested in more deep dives. I have a year's worth of interview material there in the library. Okay, that's it for today. Take care, everybody. And as always, thanks for listening.